computer, and I'm going to go into speaker view, and that's going to Rabbi Herman. You're up.
Thank you. Good Shabbos, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. At the outset, in speaking about this topic, we will probably have to break this into two different sessions. The first one being now, and probably the second one being the first one that we do in the fall, because there's just so very much when it comes to Jewish ethics and Jewish medical ethics. And so we probably will not get to the end of our discussion today. But thank you for joining us. It's great seeing so many of you at the top of my screen. I hope you're all well, sheltering safe, taking care of one another, and really spending this time enjoying each other's company. If you were to look at rabbinic lore, there was really no aging process until our patriarch Abraham. And there were really no diseases that were spoken about until Jacob, at least according to the Talmud. And according to legend, death came instantly through a sneeze, returning to God what we call the breath of life, breathed in through the nostrils at creation. And this is probably the origin of responding with expressions meaning either to your health or God bless you when someone sneezes. But apocryphal or not, disease and injury have accompanied humanity ever since, with the transition from life to death becoming increasingly long and complicated. Jews' close connection to healing, both as patients and as physicians, is ancient and rooted in both theology and history. In many religions in ancient time, and probably still some today, the idea of medical treatment was anathema. In fact, sometimes it was even considered heresy. Disease, accident, deformity were all considered no less parts of God's creation than human beings themselves. Medical treatment was considered at times meddling with God's work and will. Judaism generally views medical treatment positively, even as an obligation, based on verses such as one in Exodus, commanding an injuring party to surely heal the person that person is hurt. And Deuteronomy, where it says, take very good care of yourselves. Maimonides, the outstanding 12th century philosopher and Talmudist and physician of Spain and North Africa, viewed the provision of medical care as part of a duty to return to a person anything that he or she has lost. There were once dissident voices that claimed that verses like Exodus, I am the Lord, your healer, meant that disease was to be left to God, and that the duty to heal later on in Exodus was limited to human-caused injury. But this approach was never very widely accepted. Jewish communities from early on accorded high status to the physician, and there were many leading rabbis and scholars from the Talmudic period through the Middle Ages and beyond who were physicians as well, including, as I just mentioned, Maimonides. Also in certain societies, particularly Europe and in the Middle Ages and later, medicine was one of the few professions that was open to Jews. The prominence of Jews as medical practitioners, researchers, and teachers has continued well into our time. The physician's duty to heal is paralleled by a general duty to tend to one's own health. The Talmud forbids one to live in a city where there is no physician. One is not entitled to refuse medical treatment, except for a legitimate reason and following the local custom of the time. Judaism does not countenance suicide or permit one to help another commit suicide. People are not fully autonomous over their bodies or their lives, but receive them from God and hold them in trust. However, Jewish scholars long ago distinguished between acts which shorten a person's life and those which prevent the unnecessary delay of death. The latter are permitted. There are limits, of course. Judaism does not sanction treatments, medicines, or procedures that are overly experimental or speculative. There has to be a reasonable chance of success or benefit. And similarly, a Jew is not allowed to undertake activities which clearly endanger health. The use of drugs, for example, is permitted in order to improve health or to reduce pain. One is not required to suffer needlessly. However, the teachings of most authorities in Judaism would prohibit the use of drugs taken for the purpose of providing a high or a mind-altering experience because of the dangers that were involved to the user and others. Judaism's attitude towards a substance seems to be affected when its danger was first perceived. The biblical references to alcohol, for example, Noah's intoxication in the book of Genesis, praise for the Nazarite who abstains from alcohol, suggests an early awareness of its danger. Although I will point out to you, when you get to the book of Psalms, in chapter 104, it does say wine gladdens a person's heart. Judaism's response was to institutionalize the use of alcohol at moderate levels and in controlled circumstances. For example, Kiddush, the prayer sanctifying the day and on Shabbat and festivals. The result seems to have been, until recently at least, a relatively low incidence of alcoholism within the Jewish community. Smoking, on the other hand, has only been perceived as a serious danger. In prior centuries, it had even been praised. All rabbinical authorities today urge against it, but because of its prevalence and the desire not to declare large numbers of Jews lawbreakers, only a few have actually ruled that smoking is a specific violation of Jewish law. Now, in order to talk about health and healing and ethics, we need to go back a little bit and look at Jewish sacred texts, in particular the Bible, or the Apocrypha, which is a non-canonical post-biblical writing, rabbinic literature from the late Roman era, the Talmud and the Midrash, the Mishneh Torah, the Shulchan Aruch. All of these volumes touch upon sickness, recovery, and health. Excerpts on health from holy books and their influence on Jewish culture can be arranged readily in the following 6 subjects. First would be divine healing. Second would be healing wisdom. Third would be visiting the sick. Fourth would be religious law, or what we call halakha. 5 would be folk healing, and 6 would be professional medicine. Now, keeping those in mind, I think we need to look at the basis and validity and source of Jewish ethics being rooted in the belief in God and in God's Torah. Whereas the basis of secular ethics is based primarily on humanistic and rational intellect. Let me give you some of the basic principles of Jewish ethics as viewed by Orthodox Judaism. First, in Judaism, there's no basic difference between laws and regulations, which we call halakha, and morals and ethics, because both are considered integral parts of the Torah, and their validity flows from the power of the Torah and from divine revelation. Therefore, basic principles, discussions, and debates on Jewish ethical issues do not differ at all from those of Jewish legal issues. Secondly, Jewish ethics includes guidelines for the proper conduct of men and women in relation to other people, as well as in their relation to God. Therefore, there's no difference in the binding nature of the law between the prohibitions of stealing, killing, falsehood, revenge, carrying a grudge, and the like, and the laws prohibiting things like idol worship, Sabbath desecration, eating on Yom Kippur. Nor is there a difference between the obligations of giving charity, visiting the sick, burying the dead, caring for orphans and widows, and the like, and the observance of dietary laws, eating unleavened bread or matzah on Passover, sitting in the sukkah on Sukkot. Third, according to the Torah and Jewish law, halakha, one is obligated not only to refrain from doing bad, but one must do good by being compassionate and charitable with our fellow human beings. Where it's written, turn from evil and do good. These are 2 equal parts of Jewish ethical obligation. Therefore, not only are harmful acts such as stealing and wounding and killing prohibited, but there are positive commandments to give charity, to visit the sick, to be hospitable, to return lost objects, and the like. And fourth, Jewish legal moral principles require not only proper acts, but also proper thoughts and intentions. The Torah forbids hatred, covetousness, revenge, carrying a grudge, and the like, and requires one to love God, to love one's fellow human being, to love the stranger, and the like, in spite of the obvious difficulties in controlling one's thoughts. The Bible and the Talmud are replete with references to proper conduct between human being to human being and between human being and God. Jewish ethical teaching involves general concepts and principles on the one hand, and specific rules and regulations on the other. The Bible cites a number of basic principles about the proper relationship between human being to human being, like, for example, love your fellow human being as yourself. This is a major principle that's found in the Torah. What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor. That is the whole Torah, while the rest is commentary go and learn it. Do not profane the name of God. Namely, do not conduct yourself in a way that profanes the name of God, as you, a human being, are created, B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. You shall do what is righteous and good in the eyes of the Lord, observe justice and perform righteousness, despise evil and love good, and establish justice by the gate. Do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. You shall not stand aside while your neighbor bleeds. Justice, justice, or righteousness, righteousness, you shall pursue, that you may walk in the way of the good and keep the paths of the righteous. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. All of those are positive comments that come to us from antiquity that are not only Jewish law, halakha, but also moral ethics. However, the Jewish ethical system, like the halachic system, is not satisfied with general theoretical rules alone, but is filled with practical and individual guidelines. The Torah requires every human being to strive for perfection in one's conduct, vis-a-vis another person, in actions, in speech, and in thought, and not just abstract good behavior. And now, in terms of Jewish medical ethics, there is an obligation upon a physician to heal the sick. The role of a physician is not optional in Jewish law, but rather obligatory. There's an obligation upon the patient to seek medical help. Whenever a treatment for an illness is assumed to be medically beneficial, there is an obligation upon a patient to undergo such treatment. He who refrains from doing so is described in Jewish scripture, and surely your blood of you lives will I require. Also, making sure that you take some sort of medically beneficial treatment follows from the dictum in the Torah, which says, you shall choose life, that you and your descendants may live. There's an obligation of respect and dignity toward your fellow human being. There's a call for solidarity and mutually shared values and duties in society, rather than individualism and extreme autonomy. Jewish medical ethics, in terms of the application of halakha, Jewish law, and Jewish ethical principles to the solution of health-related problems, differs from a secular medical ethics in a few different ways. First, it differs by the range of discussions and attitudes. Second, it differs by the methods of analysis and discussion. Third, it differs in final conclusions. And fourth, it differs in the basic principles. First, let me talk about the range of discussions and attitudes. Halakha, Jewish law, addresses all medical ethical questions, which secular medical ethics raises, whether old or new. But halakha, Jewish law, also addresses specific medical issues that affect only Jews who observe the precepts of the Torah. The basic Jewish approach is the same for questions relating to the terminally ill, abortion, organ transplantation, and questions relating to the treatment of patients on Shabbat, the laws of seclusion, or the laws of menstruation. Jewish medical ethics analyzes medical ethical questions with the same methods as halakhic principles used for any halakhic analysis, using basic principles and sources that are enunciated in the Talmud or in the codes of Jewish law and the responsa literature of all generations. And we'll talk about responsa literature a little bit later. The scientific and medical data are presented, and the relevant halachic or law-oriented sources are then applied to the data. It's not always easy to arrive at a halachic conclusion regarding a medical question. A far-reaching knowledge of halakha, as well as an expert and precise understanding of relevant scientific facts, is required in order to arrive at the proper halachic conclusion. Judaism in general prefers the causistic approach to resolve halachic questions. What I mean by that is that one must examine each situation according to the individual circumstances and develop a response according to the specific details, nuances, and characteristics of that situation, using many of the basic halakhic rules, regulations, and principles. This is the methodology of rabbinic responsa literature and is really ideally suited for medical questions where the circumstances differ from patient to patient. By contrast, the current Western approach to Western secular medical ethics uses a limited number of ethical principles and applies them to all situations involving medical ethical questions. The halachic or law-oriented construct in resolving a medical ethical question is a tripartite one, involving the patient, involving the family, involving the physician and the medical team, as well as the rabbinic decisor. The patient is obligated, as I said before, to seek the best possible medical care. He or she has the autonomous right to choose the physician and the rabbinic decisor, and has the right to make his or her personal wishes known. The physician is obligated to treat the patient and must offer the best diagnostic and therapeutic interventions according to his or her knowledge and judgment. The rabbinic decisor is obligated to understand all the facts of the medical questions and consider the views presented by the patient and the physician, and then decide according to halakhic principles and precedences how to proceed in any given situation. That decision, that Jewish medical ethical decision in Orthodox Judaism, is binding both for the patient and for the physician. And it's obvious that this construct applies only to medical situations which have halakhic ramifications. Pure medical decisions are decided upon by the physician and the patient. This construct can be termed a religious paternalistic approach, which restricts the patient's as well as the physician's autonomy and requires acceptance of the halakhic decision, but it negates personal paternalism. Halakha, Jewish law, attempts to give final and operative decisions to questions posed by the rabbinic decisor. Since Judaism is not just an academic discipline, the goal of studying and teaching Jewish medical ethics, as in all other areas of Torah learning, is to put Torah law and ethics into practice. They're not, in other words, these rabbinic dictums, these rabbinic discussions of old are not necessarily just to be read, but it's to take this actual Jewish law and make it live in modernity. This is in contrast to secular medical ethics, which views its function as defining the relevant ethical dilemma, sharpening the focus of the various views, but not necessarily arriving at final and practical conclusions. Since time immemorial, however, rabbis have differed in their opinions, and not always is the final decision unanimous. You know, the idea of 4 Jews and 6 opinions. This situation is no different than any other normative legal matter. Mechanisms exist in halakha to decide among various opinions. And in this respect, there's no difference between a medical question and any other question in any area of Judaic belief or practice. Now, I think it's important at the outset here to delineate the basic principles of Jewish medical ethics as compared to secular medical ethics. Jewish ethics, including Jewish medical ethics, is based upon duties, obligations, commandments, and reciprocal responsibility. The word right, in its modern sense, meaning I am entitled to it, does not exist in biblical or Talmudic literature. By contrast, secular medical ethics is based heavily on the concept of rights and autonomy. This approach justifies human decisions that cannot be criticized as long as they do no harm to others. Judaism, however, requires self-fulfillment based on obligatory and binding moral requirements that are beyond the personal and the temporal feeling of individuals, but rather founded on the values that are mutually beneficial to society. Judaism recognizes absolutism only with respect to God as the source of authority of Jewish law. The supreme authority of the prophets who speak the words of God and the eternity of the Torah itself. Judaism does not, in general, subscribe to a set of principles and values as absolute imperative categories, but rather favors kind of a middle-of-the-road approach. In other words, sort of the path of the golden mean, which is a proper balance between different values or laws in any specific case, as stated by Solomon and by Maimonides. The ethical imperative for the average person is to conduct oneself properly with the appropriate balance between opposing values and to avoid extreme positions. So for Judaism, there is no definitive value that is absolute, such that takes precedence in every case or in every situation. various values have different moral weight, and there is a system for ascribing priorities in specific situations where conflicting values exist. This view is based on the principle that the Torah was not given to ministering angels, but the Torah was given to ordinary human beings who, by definition, are not perfect. The physician-patient relationship in Judaism is not a voluntary contractual arrangement, but a divine commandment and an obligation on both sides. The patient is commanded to seek healing from the physician and to prevent illness if possible. The physician is obligated to heal and is considered to be the messenger of God in the care of patients. The patient is not free to decide autonomously to refuse treatment, which might be beneficial or save his or her life. He or she is prohibited from relying on miracles, but must always do what is ever necessary to heal himself or herself according to standard medical practice. In Judaism, one thing that is first and foremost when it comes to Jewish medical ethics, and that is that human life is supreme. Therefore, to save a life, nearly all biblical laws are waived. In Hebrew, we call this pikuach nefesh. In matters of life and death, all law can be thrown out the window if it means saving a life. We also have the adage in Judaism which says, if you save one life, it is as if you have saved the entire world. And if you destroy one life, it's as if you've destroyed the entire world. This approach is in contrast to the secular ethical view that considers human life to be one of many values and often gives greater weight to the quality of life. Nonetheless, even in Judaism, the value of human life is not absolute, and in certain rare and well-defined circumstances, other values may supersede it. This, however, does not in any way diminish the supreme value of human life in Judaism. The four basic principles widely accepted in secular medical ethics nowadays are also accepted as important values in Judaism, but they do not receive the same weight in Jewish tradition. The principle of autonomy, which is dominant in Western secular medical ethics, is modified in Judaism. Judaism asserts that human beings were created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God, and that all people are therefore considered special and equal. So in Judaism, it requires that people must respect and help one another. Judaism also accepts a degree of patient autonomy in the physician-patient relationship. However, in certain situations which autonomy conflicts with other fundamental principles of Judaism, such as the obligation to preserve one's health and life, to avoid harming others, and to do good for others, halakha, Jewish law, may be in direct conflict with autonomy. In Judaism, Human beings are said to have free will and choice, but this doesn't mean that we're permitted to choose to live immorally or to violate Torah laws. A person is commanded to live within halachic norms, and thus our autonomy and free choice are restricted. Decision-making in areas which do not involve halakha can be totally autonomous. However, in every situation in which there's a clear halachic Jewish law position, any observant Jew, whether that Jew is the physician or the patient, they must always act within the parameters of halakha and not on one's own inclinations and desires. The principles of beneficence and non-malfeasance are clearly defined axioms in Judaism which prohibit the intentional harming of another person, either physically, emotionally, financially, or by defamation, or by an attack on objects owned by others. In addition, Jewish law clearly requires not only the avoidance of harm to others, but also the active doing of good to others or for others. Sometimes punishment is inflicted for not doing so. This approach is in contradistinction to secular law and ethics, which usually only require one to avoid harm to others, but do not obligate one to do good for others. Acts of kindness are considered praiseworthy, but not specifically required in secular law and ethics as they are in Jewish law. So coming to the aid of a stranger, kind of good Samaritanism, considered a supererogatory act in most Western societies, is obligatory in Judaism and among the Jewish people. The main source dealing with this question is the biblical story of the 4 lepers who sat at Jerusalem's gates during the war between Israel and Aram. And they said to one another, "Why sit there until we die? If we say we will enter the city when the famine is in the city and we shall die there, but if we remain here, we die also. Therefore, let us fall into the camp of Aram. If they permit us to live, we shall live. And if they kill us, we shall die." The Talmud concludes from this particular episode that one may forfeit short-term survival if there's any hope for long life. Another Talmudic source that I'd like to point out seems to contradict this rule. It is stated one should desecrate the Sabbath by removing debris from a collapsed house in order to save a life of the hour. This denotes the concept that even a very short span of life takes precedence over one of the strictest laws in Judaism, namely desecration of Shabbat. The answer to this contradiction is given by commentaries in the Talmud. In both instances, we do whatever is good for the patient with the life of the hour. Hence, in the case of desecrating the Sabbath, in order to give the person a chance to survive, we need to act, because if one does not interfere, the patient will certainly die. In the case of treating a terminally ill patient, we need to act in order to give the patient a chance to survive. because if one does not take the chance of treatment, he surely will not live. The Jewish principle concerning a decision of a dangerous treatment is as follows. A patient who is estimated to die within 12 months because of a fatal illness, and this is what defines the life of the hour, is permitted to undergo a treatment that on the one hand may extend his life beyond 12 months, but on the other hand may hasten his death. In other words, shorten the natural course of his life due to the lethal illness. There are, however, several limitations of this particular ruling. Some rabbis limit this permissive ruling to situations where the chances of success with the proposed treatment are at least 50%. Other rabbis rule that only if the chances of mortality by the proposed risky procedures is less than 30%, is it permissible to undergo the treatment. And yet still other rabbis rule that as long as there are any chances for prolonging life, it is permissible because it's being done for the patient's benefit with the chance, even remote, of prolonging the patient's life. Some rabbis limit this permissive ruling to situations where the treatment intent is curative. However, if the treatment will not eliminate the illness or the danger, but will merely postpone the danger and the death, it is prohibited if the treatment itself may actually hasten the person's death. One is not obligated to undergo a dangerous treatment, but one is permitted to do so. But if the chances of success are very high, one is obligated to submit to potentially life-saving treatment. The permissibility to endanger oneself in order to achieve a cure from an illness applies if the treatment or surgery is absolutely necessary and without which the patient will die. However, if there is doubt so that the patient might survive without the treatment and the treatment itself might hasten one's death, then it's prohibited to endanger oneself. And some rabbis write that if a patient is not in danger of dying from an illness, but is suffering terribly, and a treatment can relieve the suffering, but the treatment may cause the death of the patient, is prohibited to use it. Other rabbis rule that in such a situation, one should not instruct the patient to undergo that dangerous treatment. But if the patient requests it, it's permissible in order to alleviate that person's suffering. The permissibility to forfeit a short life expectancy in order to achieve more prolonged life applies with the patient's consent. That consent is valid and is not considered a form of attempted suicide. Neither is a refusal to submit to treatment considered an act of suicide. The patient has the right to refuse a dangerous procedure. There are some rabbis that rule in all situations where a significant risk exists, one may proceed with the treatment if a majority of expert consultants agree, and with the approval of the rabbinic advisor as well. In all situations where a permissive ruling is granted for a patient to endanger his short life expectancy, the ruling should be arrived at after careful reflection and with the approval of the rabbinic authorities acting on recommendation of the most expert of physicians. So you see, medical ethics and Jewish medical ethics begin and end in very, very different places. There are a list of 13 principles of Jewish medical ethics which are generally observed in Judaism. But before we go there, I'd like to know if there are any questions in terms of what I've said so far.
Rabbi, I think what I suggest everybody do, if you have a question, just unmute yourself. I've got a list of everybody along the side of my screen, alphabetically by first name. So if you want to ask a question or make a comment, unmute yourself, and then I'll just go down alphabetically and call on you, and then the rabbi can respond. So. I haven't seen anything so far.
All right.
To raise your hand.
Hmm?
They didn't see you.
Okay. Scott?
Okay, thank you. I'd like to ask a question about the last comment you made. I have a number of comments about some of the things you've said tonight, but the last thing was you were discussing rabbis and rabbinic councils making decisions for individuals and telling them under what circumstances they can or cannot have treatment, as opposed to the individual with his own physician or her own physician making those decisions.
Right.
And I don't quite understand that.
Well, that's where Jewish medical, that's one point, or one
Did you register?
that's one place where Jewish medical ethics and secular medical ethics divide. They're not in the same place when it comes to personal autonomy. The basis of Jewish medical ethics is found in halakha, is found in Jewish law. Now, what you might say is that all rabbis don't agree on how to interpret specific Jewish law. So there would be a differentiation of opinion among different rabbis on what Jewish law says in terms of how Jewish law is interpreted by that particular rabbinic decider. But that's very much the point what I was trying to say earlier, and that Jewish medical ethics and secular medical ethics don't coincide, mostly because of the basis of Jewish medical ethics. It's not personal autonomy. It's not based on personal autonomy, nor is it based on rational and intuitive thinking. It's more based on what Jewish tradition and Jewish law has given us down through the ages, and how we can interpret that as a living law or a living organism today.
Okay, thank you.
Rob? Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Rabbi, when does life begin in Judaism?
They say when the kids go to college. When the dog dies.
Actually, Rabbi, what I heard from a very famous dentist is when you stop the cell phone bill.
Oh.
But that's besides the point. But seriously, when does life begin?
Life begins when traditionally halakha, you're talking about in terms of Jewish law, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
Jewish law.
In terms of Jewish law, life begins when a child exits the womb of its mother. When
Okay.
a child takes this is what I was saying before, when a child takes its first breath, that's symbolic of God breathing the breath of life into humanity. Okay, so that's why in Judaism, abortion is not considered murder, because the fetus is not what's known as a nefesh. It's not a living soul until it exits the body.
Okay, I kind of thought. Thank you.
Sure. Other questions?
Any other comments or questions? Guess not.
Okay. There, as I said to you earlier, there are 13 different principles that are generally accepted as Jewish medical ethics. I'll give them to you. And we can discuss them probably at the next discussion of our adult ed, because I also want to give you kind of a Jewish ethical perspective around the coronavirus that we're in the midst of this pandemic now. So I want to make sure that we leave time for that as well. But let me briefly go through these 13 principles of Jewish medical ethics for you. First is that everything possible has to be done for every patient in terms of preserving life, treating illness, and relieving suffering. All therapeutic decisions have to be in the patient's best interests. The safest, gentlest treatment for a given condition has to always be the preferred one. And to ensure optimal care, physicians need to constantly strive to maintain and improve their knowledge and abilities through continuous study and updating of their skills. Secondly, prevention is the highest form of healing. Drugs and surgery have their place in the holy art of healing, but the need to resort to invasive treatment has to be also regarded as a failure in prevention. Third, nutrition is the primary determinant of health and the backbone of preventive medicine. Nutritional management needs to play an important role in the treatment of disease. And in this regard, for example, a vegetarian diet, sort of the ideal diet from medical, ethical, and Torah standpoints, should at least be offered with various modifications to every patient. The next ethical ideal, that Jewish prayer should be recognized as one of the most important and powerful healing tools. Jewish prayers of healing are an integral part of patient care and should be further evaluated to determine how they may be used for optimal effectiveness in treating illness. The next one is the physician's office environment should promote good health. Office personnel should be non-smokers. Waiting room magazines should be free of cigarette advertisements. And since people who care about their own health will care more about the health of others, and since empathic concern for patients depends upon strong ethical convictions regarding the prevention of suffering, office personnel should manifest a reverence for all life as well. 6, the physician should be regarded as the ultimate authority in all medical matters and should be the person primarily responsible for every patient's care. Ancillary medical personnel, such as physician's assistants, nurses, dietitians, technicians, can be involved in the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of illness only when under the direct supervision of a physician and when the following of the orders of a physician and in the administration of medications or in the carrying out of dietary orders. 7th, medical quackery, which constitutes some but not all of what is commonly termed alternative medicine, must not be integrated into scientific medical practice in accord with Jewish tradition of respect for educated opinion and legitimate authority. 8th, managed care, as generally practiced, should be abolished, as it works contrary to the patient's best interests. Limitations of patients' choice of physician is especially unethical. Health insurance companies should maintain relationships with their clients and not with their physicians. Ninth, tort reform is essential if physicians are to practice optimal medicine, treating each patient according to his or her unique needs without the fear of lawsuits. 10th, a physician may not become wealthy from medical practice, but is entitled to earn a good living. Medical fees should be determined by each physician and adjusted according to patient need, in accord with the societal importance of healing and the extensive educational background required for the practice of medicine. Physicians' fees should be substantially higher than those currently allowed by insurance companies and other institutions. Emphasis on preventative care, competent treatment of illness, avoidance of necessary surgery, honest billing practices will cause a substantial decline in healthcare costs, even with higher payments to physicians for physician services. An ethical physician earns financial gain by providing services, not by selling products. All drugs, supplies, and other items provided to patients should not be sold for profit. 12, a physician and his employees may not accept gifts or gratuities of any kind, including utilitarian articles bearing product or company names, free dinners or free services from any individual, pharmaceutical company, optician, medical supplier, or other businesses to whom patients are referred or whose products are used in patient care. The need to maintain objectivity in patient care is fairly self-evident. And 13, advertising of physician services is unethical. An ethical physician acquires new patients by his or her reputation and by referral from either physicians or from patients. Advertising is by its nature deceptive, places a stepping stone before the blind, and causes patients to seek care from those who are not best suited to treat their individual illnesses. Now, these 13 principles are not necessarily accepted by all denominations of Judaism. The Reform movement has not signed on to those particular principles, nor has the conservative movement. But the Reconstructionist movement and the Orthodox movement, as well as the traditional Haredi movements, the ultra-Orthodox movements, have all signed on to those 13 principles.
Who wrote these?
Excuse me?
I-
Someone,
oh,
someone had a question.
Go ahead.
The question, I don't know, is it
Yeah,
my
go
turn?
ahead. Go ahead.
I just was curious, said that the Reform conservative movement has not signed on, but traditional and others, Haredi, have. Where did it come from?
Where did these come from?
Yeah, you're
This-
saying signed on. Who wrote?
These came from a rabbinic committee of Orthodox and Haredi and Reconstructionist rabbis. The original intent was to have all of the denominations included in this, but the conservative and the Reform rabbis decided not to sign on to it because some of them were questionable. Some of these principles were questionable in their minds in terms of being ethical priorities. They have not yet signed on to it.
Is there a place where we can find these in writing?
I can give them to you. I can send them.
Can you?
Yeah,
Yeah,
Sure.
that would be great. If you could email it to us.
sure, Okay. sure. Not a
And
problem.
what's the source of them?
The source is this committee of rabbis appointed by Haredi, Orthodox, and Reconstructionist rabbis who've created a sort of an ethical list of medical ethics that are incumbent upon doctors and patients of those particular denominations.
Why wouldn't you have medical ethics done?
I can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Rob Obler. What I'm having trouble with, if you're dealing with procedures and ethics for the medical profession, and of course lawyers too on the tort issue, why don't you have those people involved in drawing up?
Some of these rabbis are physicians, and some of these rabbis are lawyers.
And they obviously don't do tort work.
Obviously don't do tort work.
Remember, in the Orthodox community and in the Haredi community, just because you're a rabbi doesn't mean you don't practice another profession. Okay, so there are rabbis who are physicians, and there are rabbis who are attorneys. So I will be glad to make these available to you. Okay. Okay, so let me just talk a little bit about.
Rabbi,
Yes.
what do you think of that list?
I think the list is lacking. I also think it's a little presumptuous to specifically target certain individuals as far as unethical practices. I don't think it relates enough to ethical practice of individuals. I think it's more in terms of professions and companies and insurance companies. And whereas I don't think that there shouldn't be medical ethics involving them, I think most people, when they're concerned with Jewish medical ethics, they're concerned primarily with patient care and how a patient is cared for and how a patient cares for himself or herself. So I don't necessarily subscribe to all of those. I do agree with some of them, but I don't think I would sign on to all of them.
And one follow-up, where was that written? Were there American people involved in the writing of it, or was that strictly done in Israel?
Oh, no, this was American and Israeli, not just Israeli.
But no European?
Not that I know of. Not that I know of. I can look up a list of who was on it, but I don't think there were any European. I think it was the denominations in the United States and the denomination in Israel.
Thank you. It just seemed that there are a lot of value judgments that were on the political rather than the ethical side. Thanks very much.
Oh, I think that they're probably, again, that's why I don't think I would subscribe to that entire list, because I don't think they all deal with ethical concerns.
But they make a very good case.
But I felt it important to give them to you because they're out there.
They make a good case for universal health care.
Excuse me?
They make a good case for universal health care.
Really?
I think Scott has his hand up.
Huh?
Scott?
No, it was Kathy with her hand
Oh,
up.
Kathy, I'm sorry. I only saw one hand on your name.
It was mine. One thing that I'd like to address of the list was alternative medicine, because I've had wonderful results from acupuncture. And Scott went with me for my first appointment. He's a doctor, and the acupuncturist is an MD. And he said to Scott, turn away from all of your Western medicine and just open your mind. And Scott did. And he saw the great results I had from acupuncture. So I think it's very wise of the Reform and conservative rabbis not to sign on to this list, because some of them are very restrictive.
Yeah.
Yes, personal freedom.
I mean, I think there are a lot of people who would agree with you who have sought alternative treatment that are not necessarily mainstream, although more and more acupuncture is becoming more mainstream in the United States. But I think there are people who have sought alternative care who have had wonderful results with alternative treatment. And again, I don't think that should be. I'm personally me, since I've also sought acupuncture in my life and it's been very successful. I'm not sure that I would sign on to this. I would sign on to this list simply because I don't agree with all of it. I mean, some of the stuff at the beginning I do, but as we got further on, I think they went way too far afield in terms of trying to incorporate everything in the world in that perspective. I think that's my dog.
You have to mute your dog, Rabbi.
Really. Okay, so let me just kind of close out today. I know we said an hour, but if you can give me another few minutes, let me see if I can give you a few thoughts about ethical questions around developing a coronavirus vaccine. It seems to me that the coronavirus pandemic has given rise for us to some of the most complex and significant medical ethical dilemmas in recent history, namely the question of triaging ICU care. And from that, by extension, the question of who makes the determination of who shall live and who shall die. I very much see that every time I witness a news report and they focus in on the ICU area or the emergency area, and they're triaging patients and literally making decisions on who's going to live and who's not going to live. And I think this is a question previously thought to be sort of the stuff of theoretical classroom debate. But as our society begins to contemplate how to readjust to a new normal and eventually lift this kind of social isolation that we have imposed upon us and imposed upon ourselves, I think there's new and similarly challenging ethical questions that are going to arise. One that's being debated now has not yet received very much discussion, but I believe requires our Jewish community's attention, and it revolves around the rush to develop a vaccine. And while it could take well over a year or longer before any vaccine is made available, the ethical issues likely are going to be here much sooner than that. One reason developing a vaccine takes so much time is that researchers have to randomize test subjects into groups. Group A gets the vaccine, Group B gets the placebo. Researchers wait and see if more people from Group B get sick than those in Group A. If that happens, it's a sign that the vaccine is effective. However, it can take many months before researchers get their answer because in its simplest form, this kind of study depends on waiting for people to be naturally exposed to the virus, which takes even longer amid social distancing. A video monitor inside a medical health and coordination center, the California Department of Public Health, shows the number of coronavirus cases around the world. To speed things up, an alternative is to do something called a challenge study. In a challenge study, just like a traditional study, in which some people are given an experimental vaccine and some are not, everybody in the study is deliberately exposed to the coronavirus. Researchers then compare the two groups, the vaccine versus the control. Running a study in this manner could probably save several months and probably thousands, if not millions of lives. But my question is, to expose people to the coronavirus makes this a much riskier study. Some may get very sick and some may also die. So how does Jewish law and values guide us in this? When it comes to engaging in risk in general, Judaism obligates us to attempt to help those in need, such as jumping into a river to save someone who's drowning. But the degree of risk one is required or permitted to take to save life is a matter of debate. The general consensus is that although one is not obligated to put his or her life at risk to save another person, it's praiseworthy to do so. And unless there is significant risk, in which case doing so may be forbidden. The rabbis encourage us to make kind of a cost-benefit analysis of the level of risk versus the amount of good that can result from taking that risk. For example, kidney donation, which carries some risk, is encouraged but not required, whereas bone marrow donation, which carries negligible risk, may be viewed as obligatory when performed to save a life. And for this reason, I believe that once plasma donations from those who have recovered from the coronavirus are shown to be safe and effective treating current coronavirus patients, it can be seen as an expectation of Jewish law that those who have recovered need to make those kinds of donations if they're able to do so. The benefit of attempting to save the entire society, known in Hebrew as Hatzalat Harabim, or saving the many, is given even more weight in Jewish law. For example, Queen Esther risked her life by approaching Ahasuerus, since it was to save the entire community. Similarly, the Talmud relates that in the city of Lod, the Roman emperor's daughter was murdered and the Jewish community was blamed. And the emperor threatened the Jews with mass execution unless they could produce the murderer. To save the Jewish people, two innocent brothers, Lilianus and Pappus, stepped forward and falsely confessed to the crime. Only they were executed by the Romans, sparing the rest of the Jewish community. Many rabbinic authorities permitted voluntary self-sacrifice to rescue the broader community based on Esther and on the Talmudic praise for these two righteous brothers. A one-dose bottle of the measles, mumps, or rubella virus vaccine, on the other hand, the rabbinic authorities argued that although saving the community is a very high value and one should engage in small risk to attempt to do so, the ability to do so, these stories don't prove that one who is not currently in any danger may opt to risk his or her life for the sake of the community, since the brothers in Lud and Esther would have died along with their community anyway. This brings us back to the challenge study. I believe the lesson here is that it certainly would be permitted for a Jew to serve as a participant in a challenge study associated with rapidly developing a vaccine for the coronavirus, and would be considered a very pious act indeed. This is even in accordance to the stricter opinion, since the level of risk for those in such a study is really relatively low. Only young and healthy people are accepted, and they receive careful medical oversight. And because everyone in the world is at risk for contracting the coronavirus, despite the study, they already were at risk by just living in the society we live in. Entering the study simply makes it happen in a controlled setting and can significantly benefit the entire society, and thus might be considered a mitzvah. And it's my feeling that the Jewish community should at least look at endorsing that kind of a protocol. And if a Jew has the opportunity to enter that kind of a study, it seems to me that they might consider, at least consider doing so, if not necessarily just jumping ahead and becoming a part of it. It should at least be something that's entertained in light of what's going on in the world today.
Bob Hirsch has a question, Rabbi.
Okay.
Yes, I actually have a comment. Thanks, Rabbi. I've been involved in many vaccine trials in my career, setting them up and developing products. So I just want to make a comment, not on the ethics of it, but on the whole development of products. I don't know how if they're actually going to be doing challenge trials. And based on animal models for similar viruses, it does appear that antibody is protective. So whether or not they're going to be doing challenge trials, I'm not sure. I haven't seen that just yet. But it does appear that antibody levels, the development of antibody is protective. So if you have antibody on board, individuals will be protective, at least in animal models. So it may just be that they will just do studies that they'll give vaccine to individuals, and if there's antibody present after X number of days, 1, 2, 3 weeks, then that will be sufficient evidence that the vaccine will be approved without doing challenge studies. They may not have to do challenge studies. That's just the comment I wanted to make. And the fact that they may do challenge studies in small number of patients, yes, they'll select, as you said, young individuals, and they'll be at very low risk. And that's what they did with flu studies all along in the UK, and they'd have them in close quarters, and there wasn't any issue. So I don't think there will be any issues with that if they do have to do challenge studies. But antibody levels are a good surrogate for protection. They do that all the time in safety studies every year with influenza. That's all I wanted to mention. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else? No, guess not. I'm going to.
One of the things that I remember from being a medical journalist for some years is that in any study, if one of 2 or 3 alternatives, whether it be a vaccine or a protective, a statin or something like that, if one of them seems to be head and shoulders above the other and work, I believe the standard medical ethic now is to stop the trial and make sure everybody in that trial gets the successful candidate vaccine.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
That's true, but also in the challenge study, there's a stronger impetus to do the study if you know that you have a treatment in case people get sick. If you have convalescent serum that actually will treat the people who are infected, that makes it a lot more sense to do the challenge study to prove that, in fact, your vaccine works and the treatment works. And that could also accelerate the end of this problem.
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that, right. And remdesivir does seem to be at least an effective treatment in a small number of patients. Actually, it was a 500-patient study. It does seem to be effective.
Great. Thank you. Any other questions? None? Well, thank you for attending. I hope that you've learned a little something. It's given you a little background in Jewish ethics and Jewish law. And what we'll do with the second session is I'd like to address very specific issues like end of life, like things like abortion, in vitro fertilization, and how Jewish ethics plays a role in those kinds of decisions, if that's okay with everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Sure,
Thank you.
my pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Stay well,
Shalom.
stay safe,
Bye.
good Shabbos, and hopefully I'll see you all at our next service in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Are you going to address euthanasia also? at that?
Yes, I will address
Okay.
euthanasia.
Very good. Great. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Shalom.
Wow.
Thank you.
Be well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Be well.
Be well.
Be well, everybody.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Shabbos.
Shabbos.
So nice to talk to all of you again. It's great.
Yes.
Take care.
Shalom.
Stay safe.
When is the next adult ed?
Next adult ed will be in
Still there.
We'll make that our first adult ed.
Must be awaited.
Okay.
No.
Okay?
Thank you.
I turned it off.
Right, we're ending it now. I'm recording this and I
Oh.
will make the link available to everybody.
Turn the whole thing off.
I did, and it didn't go off.
Don't get